A Texas mother of 3 vanishes around the same time her boyfriend leads police on a high-speed chase. Days later, her body is found, but the boyfriend still isn't charged in her murder.
Maybe they feel they don't have enough evidence to get probable cause.
But now the investigation is heating up.
I'm sure they're going to speak to her family, see when she left, who she left with, and that will start step by step as to where the car was. Did she get out of the car? When did he give her the car? When did she give him the car, or did he take it?
Could her boyfriend be responsible, or is there another suspect at large?
If her DNA was in the backseat or blood in the backseat, something of that nature, that would maybe give more proofs as to whether or not a murder did occur and if he was involved.
Here's what we know so far. 27-year-old Tanya Garza was last seen alive on June 7th in Corpus Christi, Texas. At the time, she was with her boyfriend, 28-year-old Matthew Davila. It was that same day that Davila was seen driving Garza's white SUV. During the same time frame, police tried to pull Davila over during a traffic check, but he fled the scene. Nearly a week later, Garza's vehicle was found in a wooded area. It had been badly burned.
There seems to be a lot of surrounding circumstances, but I'm sure this investigation is going to go on to get more direct. One of the things that's interesting, though, is that the automobile that they were investigating is now burned. So you have to wonder how much that will affect getting forensic kind of evidence, such as fingerprints, DNA, things of that nature, to see if she was ever in that car.
That's criminal defense attorney Mike Corbanix. Right off the bat, he pointed out Garza's vehicle that was found on June 12th, 5 days after she was last seen. And it was only 2 days prior, on June 10th, that her family first reported Garza missing. So often we see that investigators say the first 24 hours are the most important in any sort of abduction or missing persons case. So because it took her family a couple of days to come forward and report her as missing, do you think that delayed the investigation?
Yes and no. I think it delayed it in the sense of her, but he was someone who tried, according to what we know so far, he was trying to elude the police officers. So I'm sure they were investigating. I'm sure they had a license plate, they had an identification of a car, things of that nature. So I think it kept going, but now it seems, I don't know if at that point in time they knew it was anything more than a motor vehicle violation or knew it was going to be an alleged murder.
Officials soon determined it was Garza's vehicle that led police on the chase, but that it was Davila behind the wheel. On June 12th, investigators used canine teams and drones to find the SUV, located in a gated area of Corpus Christi surrounded by brush. The vehicle had been badly burned. Let's talk about that, the vehicle that was found burned, because we have her boyfriend who was driving the car. He took police on a bit of a chase, but we can't say for sure whether Tanya was in the car at the time. Then days later, investigators find the car that's been burned up and charred. So what would that look like for investigators working to get DNA, as you said, and other things from this vehicle that's now been almost destroyed?
If my understanding is correct, it was her vehicle he was using. And so that's another sort of circumstantial evidence that will go strongly to make a connection between him and her. The interesting thing is that I believe her parents waited 3 days or so before they called to say she was missing, and she had children. So that's an interesting thing that's going to need to be investigated as well. But I think what they're doing is a step by step and have to see the proximity of where they found the car and where the body was recovered.
On June 13th, Davila first spoke with officers. He retraced his steps that day, leading them to the location where the SUV had first been recovered. What's still unclear, why he led police on the chase days prior. Police officers are trying to pull over this guy for just a routine traffic stop. And instead of pulling over, he speeds away and leads first responders on this chase. They end up catching up with him way later. Why do you think that he wouldn't have just pulled over right away? Why would he have sped off?
That's a question of a lot of speculation. But then again, you have to wonder if he sped off because he already committed a crime. something of that nature, that he was concerned about what they would find in the vehicle, what was in the vehicle. If it's a situation where she was, say, hypothetically, she was murdered and put in the car and then dumped off somewhere, and then the car was burned, that would be an interesting thing to see, because once again, what kind of forensic evidence can they get from a car that's already been burned? But if her DNA was in the back seat or blood in the back seat, something of that nature, that would maybe give more proofs as to whether or not a murder did occur and if he was involved.
Davila was then taken into custody for eluding officers. And right now, we don't know for sure whether she was in the car at the time of this chase. But as you said, I'm sure they're going to go through and look for DNA, things like that. But is it possible they also look at security camera footage or anywhere where the vehicle would have passed by to see if they notice anyone in the passenger seat or the back seat or maybe even the trunk?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is such a different day and age because of technology. I'm sure one of the things they're going to look for is cell phones. They're going to want to see where his cell phone was. Could they locate it? Where her cell phone was? Was there communications in those cell phones? You know, it's become a very different kind of criminal justice system now because there's so much traceable evidence just by a cell phone. That's why people should think before they text, because you may think something's funny that you're replying to, but if something's happening in a bad way, then that could be interpreted by jurors in a whole different situation. You might have meant it as a joke, but someone else took it a different way.
Let's pause real quick to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm that has a $0 upfront fee. You only pay them if you win. If you've ever been in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan by submitting a claim in 8 clicks or less without having to leave your couch. To start your claim, visit forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover. Then on June 15th, officials found Garza's body near where her vehicle had been discovered. From the time she was last seen, that was June 7th, and then her body was found on June 15th, so quite a large gap in time there. Could that lapse in time make things more difficult for investigators when they're going through and looking at her body, whether they're trying to determine the cause or manner of death?
Well, I don't believe so, because they have enough forensic evidence and they have the ability to, when they perform an autopsy. I mean, probably the most critical point right now is performing that autopsy and seeing if they can find what the cause of death was and the time of death. If this was something where she was perhaps decided she passed away the day before this happened or something like that, of that nature, that could throw something into it. But then again, it could also make the argument, is that why he eluded the police? Because most people don't elude police if they're just going to get a traffic ticket.
But even with the recovery of Garza's body, Davila still hasn't been charged in her death. So investigators do finally catch up with her boyfriend and detain him, and he's now been charged for evading police and basically when he ran off. But he hasn't been charged in her murder. Why might that be?
Well, right at this point in time, maybe they feel they don't have enough evidence to get probable cause. That's not a very high standard, probable cause. It's not like finding someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just, is there enough to make that sort of conclusion to go further into the criminal process? So that could work in both ways, is to the advantage of law enforcement in one way, because they have a justified detainer on him because of the eluding and things of that nature. So while he's detained, they could do a perhaps slower and more thorough investigation, as opposed to worrying about, oh my God, is this guy a murderer? And we have to get as much evidence as soon as possible, so he's detained and not out there to put other people in danger.
We don't yet know the cause of Garza's death, but we do know the manner, murder. Officials say Garza's death is under investigation by the Corpus Christi Police Department's Homicide Division. Could the autopsy provide us clues for what led up to her murder too, whether it be a motive or what she was going through in the moments before she died?
Well, it could, if they could show some sort of struggle. There was some sort of struggle or some sort of injuries that didn't cause the death, that happened maybe a couple of hours before the death. I mean, it could give us a lot of information. but then again, it could also lack a lot of information. We have to take it one step at a time and see.
Korbanek says investigators would need specific information to charge Davila. What sort of evidence would investigators be looking for in order to cinch that charge of murder, going through his cell phone, maybe even DNA or a confession?
Well, that, and as you pointed out earlier, public video cameras, things of that nature. Um, a lot of things would be, starting from square one. I'm sure they're going to speak to her family, see when she left, who she left with, and that will start step by step as to where the car was. Did she get out of the car? When did he give her the car? When did she give him the car, or did he take it? There's a lot of information, but as much as everybody thinks it's so complicated, it's really a very step by step process. You got to start by talking to people to get information to put you on the right track.
And in true crime, this is an ongoing trope that we see all the time where they say it's always the husband or it's always the boyfriend. So would it mean that he would be a person of interest even if he hadn't had this eluding the police, evading? They would have likely come to him in the first place anyway?
Well, yeah, but they would come to him first place for many, not necessarily the same reason. You need to gather evidence, and you need, as we just spoke about, you need to gather evidence from people who were last seen with that person, and that's where you would start. So I don't think one way or another it causes a unbelievable kind of, we're just making an assumption here. They're going step by step. So I think that's very important. But the other thing too is there just seems a lot of, the thing I would like to know more about is how close was the body to where the car was. But the very fact that it was her car and he was eluding police, that would sort of pique their interest into going, yeah, we need to investigate this a little further. Well, I think what they're mainly going to be looking for is the forensic type of evidence where they have to give it to experts, such as the automobile expert, the doctor who would do the autopsy. But also what I think they need to do is really, for lack of a better term, is hit the streets. They need to find witnesses who were last seen with her, and then each witness hopefully will put them to the next step that was taken and give new witnesses and things of that nature. They could also hope that perhaps maybe if this person did do this, that there may be, now that he's incarcerated, there may be a realization by him, and maybe he would say, I'll cooperate if I could get a better deal, quite frankly, if the evidence is so overwhelming. But who knows, at this point in time, it will take a few weeks at least to get this all together.
With the investigation still underway, it's important to note Davila is only charged with eluding officers. Now, if I'm trying to think like a defense attorney and I'm representing this man, I'd be saying, okay, yeah, you might have him on eluding police, but that has nothing to do with the murder. These two things aren't connected. That was his girlfriend. Of course, he borrowed her car. So is it possible that, yes, he may have eluded police and ran off, but he has nothing to do with the murder?
It's very possible. It's very possible. It could be a coincidence. Who knows what happened? But, once again, is we have to realize he has a presumption of innocence under the judicial system. So he's presumed innocent until a jury finds him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And he's also he's got a Fifth Amendment right, and he's not obligated to participate in the investigation if he feels there's any sort of evidence, or they feel there's any sort of evidence that could connect them.
If and when a suspect is arrested, there are some major questions prosecutors will need to consider. Now, this next question, it's way down the line. It's a bit of speculation, but because this happened in Texas, I always think right away, could death penalty potentially be on the table? Because that's still a possibility in Texas. So if investigators do find who they believe is the suspect and prosecutors go forward and hope to take him to trial, is it possible that they would pursue the death penalty in this case?
Well, that would really have a lot to depend on if they could prove why it occurred. I don't think if it was an accidental death, something like that, that it would be as strong for a death penalty. But once again, it always gives the government a stronger negotiation position when someone's looking at a death penalty, where they'll say, you know what, I'd rather take 40 years than a death penalty. something of that nature. So that's something that always comes into the equation of how you're going to really solidify and come to a conclusion in the case.
Anyone with more information about Garza's disappearance or murder is asked to contact the Corpus Christi Police Department. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.